What's up, guys? Mason the Brock Henderson here, and this is the Librarians, Season 4, Episode 11, and the Trial of One. So this one ultimately takes the show this season to a place that it was one of the two that I said in the last review that I would be okay with, but at the same time, it's not the one I was hoping for, if I'm being completely honest. It feels like they could have taken another route and made it so much more interesting this season, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. This episode starts off with the library falling apart, and so they have to do a temporary tethering ceremony because they haven't actually figured out who's going to tether with Eve yet, which by the end of this episode, I think I know exactly who it's going to be, but anyway. So we see that they're trying to figure out what to do. They're trying to figure out who's going to be the one to do this tethering, who's going to be the one that's going to be immortal with Eve. And so they have this scroll that Cassandra goes to touch, and Jenkins no, don't open that, it's from the Library of Alexandria, you cannot open that, whatever, and then she opens it later. And I'm gonna be honest, this is the one problem that I do have with this episode, is Cassandra opens the scroll when Jenkins told her not to. If this were Ezekiel, I would totally understand, because they have that little glass case at the beginning, and he looks at it and it's just oh, do not, this is theft proof, do not do this, Jones. Well, I've always liked the challenge, and then rips it off. He seems like the type of, hey, don't do this, oh, I'm going to do it. Cassandra's never really seemed like that type, and on top of that, Jenkins told her not to, and she's shown in the past she has massive respect for Jenkins, so I do think that is a big problem. It's not only the fact that Cassandra did this when she was told not to, but it's also very coincidental for the plan that's being put in place in this episode, so this spell that's inside the scroll, though, it ends up being a trial to determine who's going to be the best, but it turns out to be more of a, you have to kill the rest of them for them to find out who's going to be the best of the best. So I do like the one line from the library inside of Jenkins is, they're just no, this isn't a trial. It said the search for the one. I don't remember exactly what it said now, but it's just oh, it's actually trial of the one. It's just lazy translation. That was pretty funny. It was a good line, and it sort of made sense. Oh yeah, somebody in the past just went, it's not really a trial. We'll call it something different. But we go through, and it really is setting up to be a very interesting episode. We have each of the librarians separated in their own sort of nightmare. Ezekiel is in prison. Jacob is being put under some sort of curse by a witch, and Cassandra is brought back to this trip that I don't know if we've ever heard about it, but apparently it was this school trip she went on, and everybody's making fun of her, calling her mean names, all this stuff. And so each one of them has their own little battle that's going on, and then ultimately they see that the people that are torturing them are their friends. For Cassandra it's Ezekiel and Jacob, for Jacob it's Ezekiel and Cassandra, and so on and so forth. And they're just telling them, push the button. If you want this to be over, push the button. Fight back. Push the button. And so they all press the button, and it takes them to a battlefield where they don't remember anything. All they remember is they're trying to save Jenkins, and they have to go push a button on the other side, and then the two other people in there, which are the other two librarians, are trying to stop them. They're evil. And so it sets up this showdown between the three of them. Meanwhile, Eve is with the library inside of Jenkins' body, and is just helpless, and she feels helpless, and she's just no, I have to save them, and the library is just constantly bashing her you've lost the right to save them, you have no right to save them anymore, you've already proven that you can't do this. And it's very, very emotional throughout this entire episode. It feels like it's just building up and building up, and ultimately Eve finally has a moment. She has this little thing that lets her see the truth, and she looks through it and sees that it actually is Jenkins being held by the library, and he actually is inside of his own body. And so if the library does kill him, it actually is killing Jenkins. But ultimately she's watching as Ezekiel, Jacob, and Cassandra are all trying to kill each other, and she's just I can't help them. This is a night. It's my nightmare. This is my nightmare. And it just hits her that she might be in her own nightmare. And so sure enough, she takes the little seeker's eye thing, looks at it, and then sees that she's got one of the nightmare rings on her finger as well, and doesn't remember putting it on. And to me, that was just brilliant. We never actually saw her put on the nightmare ring, but ultimately she is one of the ones that put it on, and now she's living in her own nightmare. And so she realizes her nightmare is not being able to save them. So she takes it off and then appears in between the three of them. I will say I thought it was a little bit coincidental that as soon as she appears, she's like, wait, Eve and Ezekiel and Jacob. And it's just like, oh, now they just remember everything just from seeing Eve. I thought it would be a little bit more interesting if it, like, she had to say something to convince them, or if maybe she took off all the rings for them, something like that, instead of just it being, oh, guys, I remember you now because I saw her, and that's how easy it is. But ultimately, it doesn't end there because, of course, the library steps in again as Jenkins is like, all right, pick which one's going to die because this trial is not over yet. You have to pick one that's going to die or else I'm going to kill Jenkins. It's just very, very intense scene where he's just like, pick one now! And it's just like, I can't do it. And then she does find a way, very, very clever way, by the way, of sort of tricking the library to where I don't really remember exactly the technicals of it, but she managed, there's this harness that Jenkins has on that the library is going to use to kill him if she doesn't pick who's going to be. But there's the scroll that they had. Apparently, it's like tethered to the Library of Greece or whatever. I don't really remember, or the Library of Alexandria, sorry. I don't really remember how exactly it worked, but basically she put it on the harness. Whenever she like went to grab it off of him, she like put it on the harness. And so when she did that, it was like, honestly, I don't remember how this all worked. I'm trying to explain it in a way that's just like, oh yeah, it was very clever. And it was pretty clever, except I don't really remember how she worked it out. But ultimately, like, she goes up to grab him, and then when she does, they both disappear and the harness stays. And then they end up back in the library, and then all of the other three librarians come back. It's like, hey, Eve, you saved the day. And it's just like, it's so awesome. You're the best. But of course, there's still like 10, 15 minutes left in the episode, so of course it's not over. So they're talking about, okay, we'll live on to fight another day. We need to do this. And all of a sudden, the door starts spinning up. It's just like, wait, what? The door opens, the harness flies, hits Jenkins in the chest, straps on again, and then a knife comes in, stabs him right in the heart. And I'm just like, wait, what? So yeah, Jenkins dies. And it's funny because I actually went back and I watched the last review that I did to kind of gauge what my reaction was to that. It's been a while since I watched the last two. And so I was just kind of like, okay, what happened there? I'm watching and I'm talking about, oh, it's so awesome to see Jenkins come to terms with his morality in this episode. I'm like, those were death flags. Holy crap, those were death flags. And I didn't even see him coming because the show never raises death flags. But apparently they were raising his in the last one. And yeah, it's a pretty emotional scene. The acting in the show can sometimes be goofy. And it can sometimes be a little over the top. And even when Cassandra is crying about Jenkins and saying how she can't trust the library, even that is a little bit over the top. But the scene where Jenkins actually dies is it's very simple. It's very just him talking to them and just, Cassandra, Killian, your cucumber sandwiches, those are the best thing. They were fantastic. And I don't know, it felt very simple. It didn't feel over the top. It didn't feel like some grand death, everybody like bawling. Cassandra's crying a lot. But Ezekiel and Jacob are just, holding back the tears. It just reminded me of when Jenkins gave up his immortality. That scene was just, it was so emotional, even though it wasn't like this big grand scene. It was just like the reaction to it was perfect. In my opinion, the death scene in this one, it was perfect. It was exactly the tone it needed. It wasn't too over the top. It wasn't not enough. It was just right on. The way Jenkins was talking to them, the fact that they put the Lazarus cloak on him, which brought him back to life for a minute, just to let him say some final words, it just all worked so well. So ultimately they, burn him. They have his ashes in a jar, and all three of the librarians turn in the resignation notice because they feel like they can't trust the library anymore. The fact that it took Jenkins from them, they feel like we can't do this anymore. So they resign. Eve is the only one left. She has that little thing. I wondered if maybe she was going to use it, but instead she just like throws it against the mirror that they use to talk. And then that's when in walks Nicole? No. Yes. Yes, Nicole. In walks Nicole, and she reveals that this was her plan this entire time. And here's the thing. I do like the fact that there is some villain like Nicole doing all of this. The fact that she managed to manipulate a lot of these events is pretty interesting, and it is very, very clever. To turn them against the library, it's a clever idea, and she executed it very well. But there are a few problems with this. One, and probably the personal problem for me, something that I have that maybe not everybody has, is that I did kind of want it to be the library. I don't know. I feel like that would have been interesting to see that the magic is starting to seep into the world again, and it's not really affecting the world the way everybody expected it to. Obviously there are problems, but it's not like things are blowing up like everybody says they would. And even like some of them, the librarians have shown people what the library is and that magic is real, and they're accepting it. They're just like, oh yeah, this is cool. And so I felt like maybe the library was doing this to sort of like reaffirm its place as, no, I am important. I do have a purpose here. And that would have been an interesting story to tell. But, they decided not to go with that. So I do understand, but at the same time, I am a little bit disappointed that they didn't really go all the way and make the library the bad guy. The other problem I do have, though, is that in this episode alone, it feels kind of like the library is sort of the bad guy. Even whenever we find out that Nicole was the one sort of doing all of this stuff in the background, forcing them to distrust the library, pushing them certain ways, moving them like pawns on a chessboard. Even though she is the one that's been manipulating this turn of events, this episode, the trial, the library did kind of seem evil at times. It took over Jenkins' body. It killed Jenkins in the end. That was all the library. It's not like she did all of that. Obviously, they're the ones that did the trial. They're the ones that started up. But, when the library is talking to Eve and talking about how she's lost the right to guard them, to be their guardian, that honestly seemed like the library just was evil. Like it didn't really trust them anymore. It didn't trust them to be the librarians and be her to be the guardian anymore. And to me, I'm just like, why show us all of that just at the end of this episode to turn it all around again and be like, oh, nope, none of that matters. She's actually the one that was behind it all. It just kind of feels like you are building up that maybe the library can't be trusted just for it to not be that way. But it doesn't mean that none of this in this episode happened. It all still happened. It's just now we have a bad guy to fight against. I still feel like that kind of lessens the impact of this episode. Everything that happened, even Jenkins' death, all of that feels lessened now because it's like, oh no, it's actually Nicole, setting them up to do all of this, even though the library in the end is the one that did kill Jenkins. It just doesn't feel right to me. That side of it doesn't really work. I hope there's some sort of maybe there will be an explanation as to why. Maybe the library got tricked by Nicole as well and thought maybe, that Eve and the team weren't really doing their jobs well enough. So that's just a minor thing. But the final thing is obviously just the too perfect of a plan. I understand it's one of those things where she did set this all up, and the show, I do have to suspend my disbelief a little bit, kind of like, the last episode where they go through all the library's defenses and it just happens to tie into stuff that these random people know about. I do suspend my disbelief a little bit on all of this, but there are just a few things in her plan to set this all up that I feel like she couldn't have prepared for. Cassandra opening the scroll, like I said, that completely goes against her character. Setting up this whole trial of one, how did she know they were going to do that? The fact that even Jenkins gave up his immortality to save her. Don't get me wrong, I understand she saw Eve playing into his feelings and tricking him for her. I get that. But at the same time, how did she know for certain that if she got stabbed and was near death, that Jenkins would believe Eve enough to be like, oh yes, I'll save her life. I'll give her immortality again. Just those little things that it doesn't feel like she could have prepared for. Maybe if she had been sent to the future first and saw all the events play out or something, and then was sent back to the past and then went through all of this again, that would make more sense. But for her to just be like, oh, I've been around for 500 years, so I knew all of this coming. How? That never really gets explained. So little things here and there that don't really fit. But it is building up to what hopefully will be a very interesting last episode. I will say the fact that Nicole's the bad guy sort of makes me believe that all of this is just going to work out like every other season. I did talk about last review how it just sort of feels like, every season has been, oh, bad guy, we got to stop him, the world is ending. But in the end, I know everything's going to work out fine and they're going to save the day. This season, because the library was looking like a possible bad guy, it sort of made me think, oh, maybe things aren't going to work out this season. Maybe things are going to be a little bit more difficult to accept. But now that they've given us a bad guy in Nicole that we have to go against, now I do believe that it's going to be sort of a typical Librarian season ending where it's just like, oh yeah, we can trust the library, we'll all work out, we'll save the day and save the world in the end, and the library will be safe as well. The only thing that may end up changing this season is because Jenkins is dead. I hope... Here's the thing, I like Jenkins. I like him as a character, I think he's a great character, and I love his interactions with the team. But it does kind of feel like if you're just going to kill him off just to bring him back, I feel like there's no concern if you are going to have any future seasons, which, the Librarians has always kind of been teetering on the edge of possibly being canceled every season. So if you are going to have any future seasons, though, it does sort of feel like you have to keep Jenkins dead, or else there's not going to really be much investment from me. Like, oh, I'm just going to go on watching knowing everything's going to be fine in the end. Oh, even if somebody dies, well, it's okay, magic, we'll just bring them back to life. I feel like you do have to carry through with this one. You do have to keep him out of the picture, or else you risk losing the emotion of losing somebody. So that's how I feel going into the last one. Time to go watch it, and I'll be back in a sec. And on to episode 12, the season finale and the Echoes of Memory. I should have known better. I don't know. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still really, really, really enjoy the show, but man, I wish this show would actually take some chances from time to time. And I think that's part of the problem why this show is constantly teetering on the edge of being canceled and not getting a new season, is because they always end every season like, everything works out okay. We've got nothing to look forward to next season. There's nothing else we can do. I'm surprised they've been able to write new stories every season, but it's like every season it ends, and I feel like, okay, happy ending. This is how it all ends. Happily ever after. That's how every season feels, and I do have a bit of a problem with that. In this one especially, it felt like they may take some chances. They may do something a bit different. We may have to deal with the loss. In fact, at the end of last episode, after I did my review, I was thinking to myself, maybe if they did bring Jenkins back but brought him back in a different way, maybe he ends up being in the mirror somehow, like they find a way to convince the library after this is all said and done, hey, can you at least give us Jenkins back? Because, once again, the library is the thing that killed him, so it's still showing that the library is not 100% as good as they thought, but maybe it would make it up to them by bringing them Jenkins back in a different way. But instead, they just go kind of the route that I was hoping they wouldn't go, which is a bit of time travel involved, and now time gets sort of reset and Jenkins comes back again. And that's how I kind of, when I was thinking about the end of the season, when I thought about, okay, how could they bring this all back around, the one thing that I thought was, there is still a possible way of doing time travel and then rewriting the events that happened so that Jenkins never dies. And that's exactly what they did. And I remember when I thought about that, I'm just like, if they do that, I'd be pretty disappointed. I'm pretty disappointed. So let's talk about this episode before we get to that, though, because overall it was pretty interesting. We see Eve right after the library disappears. She's in a new world where the library never existed. Because alternate parallel universes, I don't know. It's some confusing thing where somehow because the library disappeared, now all of a sudden the world is as though the library had never existed to begin with. And so Nicole is now running this world somehow. She keeps her memory of what happened through some charm on her neck. And so she's in charge of this world where no thought exists. And I think this is a ripoff of The Giver. I can't remember. I don't know if I ever. I know I want to read the book because I've heard about it, but I don't know if I've ever actually seen it. But I'm pretty sure it's a world where no thought exists and thus no color exists. And so that's pretty much this world. Is there's no color, there's no thought, there's no ideas, no dreams. They have thought police. So that type of world, I think that's kind of what The Giver's world is. If you've ever read the book or seen the movie, I haven't. So that's the world they live in, but Eve still remembers the library just a little bit. She's holding on to her memories by using a thought, a mind palace, a thought palace. Can't remember what it's called now. But she does it. Then she gets a little video message from Flynn through his tethering ring, and he sort of explains the situation and explains that she's got to find everybody and try to find a way to bring the library back. And so she does track down everybody except she manages to get Stone and Cassandra on board right away. But Ezekiel is just like, no, I don't trust you. You know, I have a good life here. He's in charge of like the most popular TV show because it's the only one in this world, and so he doesn't want to go. She ends up getting taken into this asylum where Flynn is also, and so they're talking, and you can see they're starting to hit it off again because they're just meant for each other, and you know they both kind of have that sense that there's something else here. There's something else going on. And so Flynn ends up getting taken in again by Nicole. She like zaps his brain and then takes him to this room where Eve tracks him to. And then he reveals that he's actually built up a resistance to their little thought erasing machine. And also has this wall and it like rips it open, or Eve rips it open. And it's like this wall that just has all of the stuff about the library, all the stuff that he remembered before time got changed. And so that's how he manages to keep a hold of all of his ideas and his thoughts. And, you know, that was a pretty cool idea. But, of course, then in walks Nicole, and she threatens to just permanently erase them, pretty much. But not before Cassandra and Jacob go get Stone, and they all get together again, and they start remembering, oh, yeah, we're the Librarians, which I will say it is pretty cool whenever they break in, and then these three guys, like, step up, and they've got guns. It's like, identify yourself. And honestly, I kind of thought, because Jacob had just ripped off his sleeves, he's like, this feels better. I kind of thought he was just going to take him on because that's who Stone is. But all at once, they all three say, we're the Librarians. And it actually works. And so it's kind of like this whole time, they were trying it one at a time. But the truth is, they needed to all say it together because the three of them alone aren't really what the library was looking for. The library brought them in together because that's what it needed. It needed those three together to work together and equal, you know, somebody who is the librarian. I've said this before how, you know, Flynn is kind of, he's not as smart as Cassandra, he's not as cunning as Ezekiel, and he's not as knowledgeable as Jacob, but he's got all of them, and he is pretty much a combination of all three of them, just not quite as powerful individually. And so that's why he's a librarian. Well, all three of them equal something better than even Flynn is, and that's why they are together the Librarians. And I don't know, I love the fact that it worked in this episode. It does kind of feel like, though, because they finally realized how to do it, it kind of feels like this is maybe the last season because, I don't know, it almost sort of, in my mind, I think, you know, they would figure it out the last season. Of course, then again, time gets rewritten and they don't remember any of it, so maybe there is another season coming. I don't know. But they managed to get in, save Flynn and Baird, and then they all get to this one room where they're pretty much trapped. These people are on the outside of this fence, like banging, trying to get in. And then that's when Flynn realizes we need to bring the library back. And he's like, it's in all of us. And then Eve sort of goes through each one of them and talks about what each one brings to the library. You know, Jacob has the thought process, you know, the knowledge of the library. Cassandra has the science behind the library. Ezekiel knows all about the artifacts and the value of the artifacts. And then Flynn, of course, is the heart of the library. And then as they're thinking about it, it comes back and it exists again. But it can't end there, of course, because, you know, like I said, if it had ended there, if they had maybe found a way to stop Nicole, maybe lock her up or something, keep her from doing this again, if they had done that, it would have been pretty interesting to see where they could go from there. You know, what what would happen next, what would come next season. They would probably end the season on the tethering ceremony, and then go on from there and be like, all right, so now what do we do next? Well, they do end on the tethering ceremony, but before we get to that, Flynn's just like, hang on, I got one more thing I need to do. He goes back in time to when Nicole was about to drink this immortality potion, and gives her this little speech, which I'll admit, I understand why it worked, but there's a part of me that's just like, it wouldn't have been more interesting if he had to do something else, if he had to, like, kill her to make sure she didn't do all this stuff, or maybe, break the immortality potion so she couldn't live forever. Instead, he just talks to her a little bit and she's like, look, I wanted to come back for you, but I couldn't because I was too guilt-ridden with what happened. And he's like, look, here's the book of your life. You need to do exactly what it says in there, but this time do it for the library. She's like, I always thought I was your guardian, but now I realize I'm the library's guardian. And then it all works out. Time resets. They go back to the tethering ceremony at the beginning of this season, but it hasn't happened yet. Eve and Flynn are the only two that remember all the stuff that happened in this other timeline that didn't happen here. And so Jenkins is still alive. They do the tethering ceremony to end off the season, and happily ever after again. Like I said, it's not that I don't enjoy the show. It's not that I didn't enjoy this season. This season was easily the best one so far, but the ending, it feels like every single season is the same. It's the same concept. It's this concept of things may not work out. Some things in life are hard. Things are going to change. Jenkins turns mortal, then Jenkins dies, but in the end it all resets and is all happily ever after. I think it was season 2, there was a moment where Flynn and Eve get trapped in the past, and it's just like, well, that sucks. How are we going to get them back? But then they get this little note, and it's just like, oh, they froze themselves in stone, and here they are, and it all works out. Happily ever after. Last season, there was this prophecy that Flynn was going to die. He was going to sacrifice himself to save the world. And it was just like, oh, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with the thought of you're going to die? Prophecy says you're going to die. And no matter what you do, nothing can change that. Well, they managed to find a way around it, and happily ever after. And that's one of the things that really bugs me at times about the show, is that they never really take those chances. They never do anything different. At the end of the season, everything remains the same. And instead of building up to a possible next season, it's always like, well, we don't know if we're going to get one, so let's just end on a happily ever after note right at the end of the season. And it kind of reminds me, if you guys ever saw Legend of Korra, it's like the sequel to Avatar: The Last Airbender series. That one, great series. Loved it. Legend of Korra, not bad either, but I only watched the first season. I never got to watch the next few, even though I heard they're pretty good as well. But the problem I had with the first season was the very end. It was very good, building up to it, doing a very good job, of sort of building up. And then at the very end, she makes a difficult decision, but bam, she ends up. It's like this quick little last minute happily ever after note, because they weren't sure if they were going to get another season. And that's what the Librarians feels like every single season. They're not sure if they're going to get another one. So we got to wrap it up with a happily ever after note. But that doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like that's what you've been building up to. It doesn't feel like what you've been leading towards. And even if you're not going to get a next season, you can still have things happen that change their lives. Jenkins being mortal, that would have been an interesting thing. Even if it ends this season, even if this is the last one, they don't get renewed again, that would be something interesting to leave off on. They managed to save the world, but Jenkins is now mortal. Or even Jenkins is now dead. That would be something interesting. If the library somehow was changed because of all of this, maybe it was revealed to be evil, maybe they don't get another season, but you know what? Did they manage to save the world? Sure. But it came at a cost. It came at the cost of maybe the library, or it came at the cost of losing several artifacts. Something along those lines, so it feels like decisions actually matter. There's a weight to the show. But unfortunately, they don't do that, and it kind of loses its impact. And so that's my feeling about the season overall. It's just, it was very, very good. I really enjoyed it. A lot of interesting turning points and a lot of interesting story elements throughout the season. Some of them I felt like didn't really go the way I thought they were going to. The one librarian that came from the past. There are a couple things there that I thought may be leaning towards, like the thought of you can only ever have one librarian. The whole Civil War thing. that sort of played into the whole you got to find one librarian to tether with, and kind of building up the mistrust of the library, but it never really went as far as I thought it was going to. So there are a couple story elements that I feel like the ending does sort of take away from, but at the same time, I still enjoyed a lot of this season. I enjoyed the mystery of it. I enjoyed, honestly, the overall feel of this season was a lot more serious in tone. Even if at the end it did end on a happily ever after note, it still felt like most of the season was building up very well, and it was a very well written story. I just think that they have this thought in their minds by the end of the season that we have to end it on a happy note, or else we risk not getting another season and ending on a cliffhanger, and nobody would like that. So maybe those are just my thoughts, but please let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Let me know. We can talk about and discuss all that good stuff. Leave a like and subscribe. Hopefully future Librarians reviews. I'll hopefully see you guys in the next season. Peace out.